While the tentacles were devouring everything that moved at the bottom of the ocean, Lu Shang began to concentrate, forming bubbles in the water. He closed his eyes and decided. It was time to enter the dream space to train a bit while his body took care of feeding him. The 3 eyes on his abdomen were shining intensely, searching for food. In the dream space, everything was chaos, buildings were destroyed, and there was no trace of human life, making it a perfect place to train. Once Lu Shang arrived in the dream space, a zombie thought it had found food and tried to attack him by surprise. But our boy reacted. In time, he clenched his fist, turned around, and delivered a strong punch to the zombie's jaw. His mission was to harvest the remaining memories of this place's great warriors. Another zombie appeared. Lu Shang delivered a powerful punch, defeating it without much effort. He began to observe the zombie's corpse with a calm expression. In total, he had cleared 3 streets, defeating a total of 8 zombies with the same power as martial warriors. Among them were 5 level 7 and 3 level 8 zombies, with power similar to that of a grandmaster. In front of him was a pile of corpses from the zombie warriors he had defeated. His attention was fixed on them. Nowadays, with perfect martial arts, he had a total of 50 types of zombies with different martial wills, all fused with his willpower. As he observed the corpses, a question came to his mind. He didn't know if there would be a qualitative transformation when there were 100 types of zombies. He decided to stop thinking about the matter, intertwining his hands, closing his eyes, and sitting on the ground to meditate. Now it was just time to wait for his wounds to heal a bit more so that later he could eliminate the cells before leaving. But then he remembered something, opened his eyes, and with a serious gaze, decided to check the information in the system's database. He called Aing and asked her to access his personal information. The sexy Aing began to manifest herself, closed her eyes, and nodded her. Our boy started watching her in silence. Not long after, several red windows of the system appeared in front of him. Lu Shang's eyes filled with curiosity and he began reading the information. Now he was sure that the information in the system's database about his future was fabricated. But what was clear was that the other stored data were real. Lu Shang placed his hand under his chin, and with a curious gaze began carefully reading through the information displayed on the system. Window. Martial arts inheritance, medicinal recipes, resource points, they were very important aids. And the key to accessing deeper hidden information within the system was obtaining more permissions. Just then, the eyes of our boy widened with surprise. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. In front of him was a window with the photograph of Zhao Ji, and in another photo appeared Lu Shang next to the corpse of the martial saint from the extreme dojo. In Ninghai, after severely injuring the martial saint from the extreme dojo, Lu Shang had disappeared while being gravely injured after the fight. However, after 3 years he had returned to kill Zhao Ji, defeating martial saint Lin Zhengyu and overcoming martial saint Tan Zhong. Lu Shang knew that this information was false since Zhao Ji hadn't died, but he decided not to pay much attention to it as sooner or later he was going to die. The system began to display personal information about Lu Shang. After a battle, our boy's body was surrounded by golden energy. At the age of 25 he had reached level 9, becoming the youngest martial saint in the history of the martial path, known as a perfect being, showing his strength to everyone, and there was no worthy rival capable of facing him. Lu Shang appeared in front of hundreds of men dressed in black clothes. At the age of 30, he had founded the sacred martial sanctuary and spread martial arts throughout the world, making a massive contribution to the development of human martial civilization, and under his tutelage, 10 more martial saints emerged. Seeing this, his eyes filled with joy, causing a proud smile to spread across his face. Previously he remembered having read that he was known as the strongest being under heaven now that he had reached a higher level and did not know why he had lost that title. His mind filled with curiosity and he decided to keep reading to find out. The system began to display the image of Lu Shang releasing a powerful and malevolent energy. At 100 years old, he had reached level 10, thus becoming the first level 10 expert in the history of the martial path, paving the way for level 10 for future generations, and receiving the honorary title of martial ancestor. In the following 2 years, the world lost track of Lu Shang and people came to the conclusion that the martial saint might have left Blue Planet and traveled towards the stars of the universe. While little Ying was floating nearby, a smile spread across Lu Shang's face and he couldn't help but feel happy. He didn't know what it meant to be a martial ancestor, questioning if it was a title similar to Confucius from his past life, someone far superior to any god that existed on earth, and could be considered a supreme name destined to endure for generations. Lu Shang's eyes filled with surprise and fear, causing him to start sweating. He panicked, realizing that something was not right. With an expression full of fear, he began to recall when that bastard Zhao Ji had taken the card out of his mouth. The card was a protection talisman from a level 10 warrior, which demonstrated that this world should have originally had the path of level 10. He didn't know how it was possible that he had been the one to open this path. To him, this was very strange, but he thought the reason behind it was that the information in the systems, the database wasn't complete, causing a significant deviation in future predictions. Lu Shang calmed down, turned towards Ying, and with a calm expression explained that at the top of this world's pyramid there were still many secrets he did not understand. Now that he was a martial ancestor, he thought his access level should no longer be low, so he asked her to please check his permissions. Ying began to observe Lu Shang in silence, until several seconds later, she accessed the system's database, revealing that he had a historical evolution as a 10-star character. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with excitement. He couldn't help but smile since before he only had a level 7 clearance and now it had directly risen by 3 levels. He adjusted his jacket with his hand and his attention focused on Ying. His eyes filled with joy because, according to his previous experiences, level 7 clearance opened the path to advance from 7 to 8. Now that he had reached level 10, the system should open the way for him to progress from level 10 to 11. He had completely cleared the path from level 9 to level 11, so he asked her to bring out all the cultivation techniques of level 11. Ying extended her hand toward the system window and using her powers, she began to modify the system's information. Lu Shang started observing silently with a curious gaze, ready to see how to ascend to level 11. Not long after, the system began creating a window with books and several scrolls of parchment. Lu Shang waited until the system finished loading. The system window disappeared, leaving the books and scrolls of parchment on the ground. He picked up one of the books, opened it and started reading attentively. The first 5 were more advanced chapters than he had learned before, the last 4 were new. His attention focused on a new technique called the Art of 5 Seasons Fists, which had been created by Wang Qi. Was said that in ancient times between heaven and earth, besides spring, summer, autumn, and winter, there existed a 5th season. And when the 5th season arrived, 10 suns would appear in the sky. The light and heat were capable of burning mountains, rivers, and lands until they were dry and withered. All living beings perished under the scorching heat, turning the world into an oven. Lu Shang's eyes widened in surprise as he realized that the Art of 5 Seasons Fists traced back to ancient martial arts. To recreate the terrifying scene of 10 suns in the sky at once. For him, this martial art was grandiose and majestic. It turned out that Shi Xingning's supreme master level called 10 suns in the sky had been derived by imitating Wang Qi's fist style. Lu Shang closed the book in his mind. Filled with curiosity, he picked up a scroll and decided it was time to read it. He opened the scroll and his expression changed, his gaze filled with confusion, his mind filled with questions and despair since he could not understand anything written on it. The scroll began to emit a powerful blue aura. Our boy's head started to smoke, but even so he decided to continue reading, making him feel furious. He read about the founder of the Yang Yishua technique and did not knowing what this technique was about or what relation it had with martial arts. For him, reading this was like reading a dictionary. Now his head hurts. But as he continued reading, his eyes widened in surprise. Even though he didn't understand it very well, this technique only talked about how to construct the internal universe, the connection between the external and internal universe and its construction. Additionally, it mixed a large number of theories of possibilities. To him, this was nothing more than an academic article and could not be considered a technique. Furthermore, this technique had a surprisingly high level. It didn't take him long to realize that this was the process for ascending from level 11 to level 12. Lu Shang, somewhat angry and confused, closed the scroll and left it on the ground. He was barely at level L8 and for now understood nothing, so he decided to forget about it and leave difficult things for later. He picked up another book, opened it with a curious expression, and began reading attentively. He decided that it was better to take a look at the 5 seasons technique. He started imagining the entire universe. Honestly speaking, he knew that if he managed to learn how to use the internal universe, then he would obtain history's strongest supreme combat technique. No other martial art or martial skill could compare with it, since after all no martial art could be fiercer than using an internal universe to strike someone. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with seriousness and his attention fixed on the book. He had already reached the legendary 5th realm, and with this level 11 fist technique, no one knew what kind of power he was going to unleash. He started to gaze at his hand, which was emitting martial flames. His eyes were full of determination as he thought that with the fist of the 5 seasons technique, he might even be able to challenge powerful warriors of level 10 or higher. He placed his hand over his chest and absorbed the power he had in his hand. His eyes began to shine with excitement, causing a smile to appear on his face. He clenched his fist and swore to kill the powerful level 10 warrior who had left him gravely injured the next time they met. Next to him was Aang, and her body was shining. He turned to her and started observing her and asked her to show all the content of the Flame Project. She started projecting a system window and explained that he did not have sufficient permissions to access the content. Lu Shang remained silently watching, not knowing what was happening. He placed his hand under his chin and his eyes filled with surprise. This did not seem strange to him, so he decided to elevate his permissions to level 11 before being able to unravel all the secrets of the dream space. He closed his eyes, started shaking his head, and using his hand, he closed the system window. His most important goal now was to reach the 9th level from the 8th. He decided to see how the path to level 9 was achieved. He used the technique called total concentration, making golden flames appear around his body. First, he had to complete the fusion of the body, energy, and spirit into a single entity. Then he had to connect with the sky and the earth using the force of the world to forge his own martial seal and build a martial projection. This was where the difference between the most powerful warriors really began to show. He began imagining the spirit of a powerful martial warrior with 4 arms, and compared to it, the user of the martial projection seemed like an ant. According to what was mentioned, the standard for a martial projection had different qualities. If the martial projection was less than 1,000 meters tall, it was low quality. From 1,000 to 500 meters tall it was medium quality, and more than 5,000 meters tall it was high quality. Lu Shang's eyes filled with seriousness, and he couldn't help but go into. Our boy began to recall the martial projection of the martial saint from the Supreme. His miserable martial projection didn't even reach 500 meters, being of the lowest quality, and calling him a village martial saint was even too generous. The reality was that this guy only relied on earthly devotion to sustain his divinity, being trash. Lu Shang placed his hand under his chin and sank into thought. The martial projections condensed with natural breathing techniques and crystal visualization were both of maximum quality. His eyes began to shine with joy, as he had an endless number of techniques and martial arts at his disposal. If he could combine these superior quality projections and fuse them all into his perfect martial art, he didn't know what kind of projection would emerge. He started imagining the projection of the spirit of a powerful demon with a murderous gaze. Lu Shang closed the book and decided not to think too much about it, since daydreaming would make him lose his way. And besides, fusing all this was incredibly difficult. He had no idea where to start. But it didn't matter, because the first step was slowly merging his body, energy, and spirit. He began cracking his knuckles, and his eyes filled with excitement as a smile appeared on his face. In the end, if he managed to learn the 5 seasons fist technique with the strength of his ever-increasing immortal cells, even if he got stuck at the peak of level 8 for some time, he would still be able to kill martial saints as if they were mere chickens. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video. A while later, as the air bubbles were emerging toward the surface, Lu Shang gradually began to open his eyes and exited the dream space. Our boy had been carefully studying and training in the various newly discovered skills within the dream space, and after a month, he had mastered their fundamentals. His eyes were full of exhaustion, and despite having slept for more than a month, he was neither hungry nor fatigued, since his mutant body had constantly taken care of nourishing him. He clenched his fist tightly, causing golden energy to appear around his body. He closed his eyes and focused. His external wounds had already healed, and his damaged organs had also regenerated. During this time, he had finally completely eliminated the remnants of power from the powerful level 10 warrior who had attacked him. Now all that remained was to wait a little longer for the small injury and his spiritual force to heal as well. He rested his hand on his knee and, with a calm gaze, prepared to stand up. Almost everything was ready, so he decided it was time to leave this place. The eyes on his abdomen activated and began scanning the area. Lu Shang's eyes were filled with seriousness as he gathered momentum and started ascending towards the surface at great speed, creating air bubbles. The problem of his mutated body would resolve itself as soon as he left the abyssal cave. Once he exited this place, the rules being suppressed by the power of the cave would disappear, and without the help of the essence of flesh and blood from exotic beasts, his body would return to normality, and all alien cells would die. Once our boy ascended a little, something happened. The tentacles on his back started moving abruptly. He didn't pay much attention to it, thinking it must be something normal. But just then, the 4 tentacles shot backward, coiled up and grabbed tightly onto the stones, causing Lu Shang's body to stop abruptly, his mind filled with confusion, making him turn around. His eyes spread in surprise, leaving him in shock. His attention fixed on the tentacles, and he was somewhat furious. Now that our boy was not moving, a malevolent energy began to emerge from the depths of the cave, causing a red flash to appear. Lu Shang started observing carefully, remembering that this cave was just like an S-level cave, but the difference being that in the depths of the ocean there was a consciousness from another world, which had noticed that Lu Sheng had been resting in this place for some time. Now he was high-quality food and a good candidate. The energy became more intense, as what hid within it wanted to confuse Lu Sheng into staying. But as expected, he wasn't foolish at all. Consumed by rage, he grabbed one of the tentacles tightly. Lu Sheng. Using his power, he grabbed another tentacle and began staring intently at the flash. He clenched his teeth and with little effort snapped one of the tentacles. The tentacle split in two, and the eye on it filled with tears upon feeling pain. Lu Sheng's gaze fixed on it. He was furious, because the tentacle kept clinging to the rocks. He mentioned that he couldn't be blamed for splitting it in half, since after all this was his body. He clenched his teeth due to panic and went on alert, being aware that he couldn't stay in this place any longer since the self-awareness of the cells was becoming increasingly stronger, and no one knew what problems were going to arise. Afterwards, Lu Sheng extended his hand toward the surface, and using all his strength, began swimming towards the surface. The first thing was to get out of the cave, then solve the problem of the cells, and finally rebuild his stellar immortal body. Only with this would he be able to become a great hero again. But then something happened, and Lu Sheng's eyes filled with surprise and panic. A powerful golden energy began emerging from the immortal cells concentrated on his forehead. Lu Sheng stopped swimming, turned around, and his eyes widened in fear, realizing that the consciousness hidden in the cave had reached him and was not going to let him leave this place so easily. Dozens of red eyes appeared and began staring at Lu Sheng. Consciously, he started releasing energy, and his attention fixed on the eyes. He remained silent, not knowing what to do. Several tentacles began approaching our boy at great speed. He started observing carefully and soon realized that it was using force upon seeing that it hadn't been able to deceive him. He was not going to stand idly by doing nothing. He began to concentrate power in his hand, and with a furious gaze full of determination, revealed that they were not on the same path, and forcing something that was not going to work would not bring good results. Our boy concentrated the power of the cells and transformed his arm into a powerful and sharp blade. He adopted an offensive stance, ready to defend himself from the attack. Once the tentacles approached to capture him, Lu Sheng moved at the speed of light, and using his sharp blade, cut the tentacles into pieces. His eyes began to shine with determination, showing that he wanted to get out of this place alive. Now that Lu Sheng was out of danger, he moved like lightning and got away from the eyes. Upon noticing this, the consciousness, who was furious, manifested and began to roar. In an instant he left the cave, started saying goodbye to the consciousness, and with a smile mocked it by saying there was no need for it to accompany him. Instead of feeling furious, the eyes of the consciousness filled with joy, as if it had an ace up its sleeve or another hidden plan to capture Lu Sheng. He thought it was out of danger, but then a powerful energy appeared. Lu Sheng's eyes widened in fear, making him sweat. A voice began to sound in his head, asking what he found so funny. Lu Sheng prepared to flee from this place once and for all, but just before he could move, a powerful portal similar to that of the level 10 warrior who had left him almost dead emerged. Behind him, Lu Sheng was paralyzed with fear, and his eyes widened in confusion, not knowing what to do to get out of this place. His body began to be sucked into the portal, and it didn't took him long to realize that this was the abyss. The persuasion plan had only been a facade of consciousness, and its true purpose was to deceive him into entering the abyss. He tried to move but was unable. The portal connected to a different space where there were several planets. Lu Sheng appeared in this place and began floating, and it didn't take long for him to realize that the place was dangerous. His body had changed and now seemed to be made of energy instead of matter. The portal started closing, our boy's attention focused on it, and instead of panicking, remained calm. It didn't surprise him that people who entered the abyss never returned, since the only way back closed off. And although it seemed like there wasn't any danger in this place, those trapped here were lost forever in countless spaces. Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with tranquility. After thinking calmly, he realized that something was not right. The portal had not disappeared but was in another place, only he had not found it yet. Otherwise, level 10 and 11 warriors would not be able to come and go from Earth. The only issue now is that he did not know how to find the portal to return. Just then, one of the tentacles gazed fixed on him and it began pointing to one side. The tentacle started touching our boy's chest, catching his attention. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with surprise as he realized that it knew where the portal to return was. His mind became filled with confusion since he did not know how it could know where the portal was. Wondering if the key to entering and leaving this place lay in alien cells, he decided to stop thinking about it and go take a look. His eyes began to shine with determination, asking it to indicate where the portal was. The tentacle started pointing in which direction to go, and our boy began following the instructions, heading towards the portal. He started observing the planets and couldn't help but smile with a joyful expression. He realized that this space was truly peculiar, it was indescribable. He felt as if he were in a space of nothingness. Our boy began following the instructions of the demonic cells, and then the tentacles started moving with excitement. Lu Sheng began observing and couldn't help but smile upon realizing that the intense emotion of joy from the cells was very strong, which meant they were close to the portal. His happiness did not last long as a powerful ball of evil energy began to manifest above him. Lu Sheng froze in place, not knowing what was happening. His gaze filled with fear, making him panic as something was wrong and the consciousness had come to catch him. The eye that was on the tentacle filled with malice. Lu Sheng became furious and started shouting, calling the tentacle bastard. This place had an exit, and it was the exit where the consciousness that wanted to catch and devour him was. The malignant energy began to grow more intense, and not long after, a giant eye and several small eyes appeared and started staring fixedly at our boy. The consciousness was happy to have found Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng began to observe the eye in silence, paralyzed with fear, not knowing what kind of warrior this monster was. The eye used its power, making a hand made of spiritual energy. It prepared to catch Lu Sheng. He raised his head and saw how little by little the hand was getting closer. The hand tried to catch him, but at that moment, Lu Sheng moved at great speed, barely saving himself. His gaze fixed on the eyes. He couldn't help but grit his teeth and feel desperate. The tentacles emerging from his body stood in front of him and prepared to attack him. And upon seeing this, he couldn't help but panic even more. Voice of the penguins. Lu Sheng turned around and his eyes filled with confusion. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Not far from Lu Sheng, there was a snowy mountain and the sky was clear. With a calm expression, our boy began to scan his surroundings and sighed upon seeing ice. He became curious as he did not know exactly where he was. Several penguins surrounded him. The tentacles that Lu Sheng had previously cut off grew back on his body. He placed one hand on his waist, and his attention fixed on them, realizing that he was in Antarctica. The eyes on his abdomen started staring at him intently and growling to get his attention, and it worked very well. Lu Sheng was furious, and without hesitating even for a second, clenched his fist tightly and punched one of the eyes. His eyes filled with seriousness, he began to stare at them intently and made one thing clear now that they were inside his body. They had to obey him, or otherwise, they would die. Lu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. He realized that his alien body had its own consciousness, but this didn't matter since they had dared to betray him, and if he couldn't even fully control his own body, there was no point in practicing martial arts. The eyes reactivated, they started observing Lu Shang and growled again. While the tentacles floated, our boy clenched his fist and fixed his attention on them. With a serious expression, he explained that if they didn't want to die, then they must follow his rules. First was to follow his orders, second was to condense energy, then transform, and finally sublimate. Lu Shang closed his eyes and sank into his thoughts. He decided it was time to establish some clear rules for the cells. Inside his body, there were a bunch of alien blue cells. He concentrated and a golden energy began to approach the cells. He had never tried this before, but he wanted to know what would happen when the cells took the same path as the immortal cells. Lu Shang closed his eyes and began to concentrate, making a powerful golden energy appear in his chest. He wanted to know what kind of existence was going to be born when these cells followed the path of the immortal cells, questioning if they were going to be able to resist the annihilation of the rules. The energy little by little began to enter the cell nucleus one after another, due to the constant impact of refinement. The alien cells little by little began to sublimate and experience active apoptosis. Lu Shang decided to concentrate all the energy in a single point. He fixed his spiritual force on that point and infused all his energy with all his strength, causing the cell nucleus to start shining intensely. The cells began to undergo changes, first about 10,000 times until reaching 1,000,000 times. A smoke screen appeared around Lu Shang, and once it disappeared, it could be seen that his body had returned to normal, and there no longer seemed to be traces of the alien cells. Lu Shang's eyes were filled with sadness, and his attention was fixed on his hand. It was a pity because just after billions of transformations, he was about to enter a new level. But the energy of the alien cells had been exhausted and he had no choice but to temporarily stop the process to enter hibernation. Not every trace of his previous body had disappeared. In his hand there was still a blue eye, which was slowly beginning to close. Once the eyes closed, Lu Shang began observing carefully and realized that this path was viable, so he decided to try transforming the cells later. Just then, the sound of a ship's horn was heard. Lu Shang's eyes spread in surprise. He turned around and couldn't help but feel somewhat astonished. In the middle of Antarctica, there was a large ship sailing the sea. It was gigantic and seemed very luxurious. The attention of our boy fixed on the ship. He hid behind the iceberg and began to observe without knowing what a ship was doing in this area. He jumped and started to fly. He wanted to take advantage of this moment to confirm the place where he was now. The ship was sailing at full speed, breaking the ice in its path. Lu Shang started flying, got a little closer, and his gaze filled with confusion since on the ship there were 30 warriors below level 7, 2 level 7 masters. Additionally, there was a scientific room, so there could be a level 8 Grand Master supervising. By their appearance, they all seemed to be people from the Lion Kingdom. For him this was something suspicious and strange. What caught his attention the most was the level 8 Grand Master. The ship was very luxurious. It had several floors and on the highest one there were a lot of people. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine. Using his powers, he started scanning the area to see where the level 8 Grand Master was. Several minutes later, he found the room where the Grand Master was. Somewhere on the ship, there was a couple sitting on the sofa, having a good time. The level 8 Grand Master was a man with orange hair. Above him was a sexy woman. The man started observing her and couldn't help but smile. Lu Shang realized that this guy was nothing more than a womanizer and lover of drinking. Next to them was a table on which there was a ring with a purple eye. Lu Shang paid attention and realized that judging by the pattern of the ring, it was an ocular ring. Our boy was perplexed and confused. This ship belonged to the research organization Ocular known as Huion. His mind filled with curiosity, so he decided to take a look at the other rooms in search of information. In some other room of the ship, there was a woman with blue hair sitting and writing something. She seemed to have the best room since sunlight was coming directly through the window. She picked up the pen and with a cheerful expression began to write in her diary. Today was February 14th of the year 317 and it was sunny weather. It was her 25th Valentine's Day. She wasn't enjoying red wine or steak at an elegant restaurant. No music fitting for the occasion nor an attractive companion for a date. She was going to spend this day alone in the cabin of the explorer amid the extreme cold of Antarctica, surrounded by penguins and exotic creatures. She began to imagine a man wearing a scientist's lab coat with his arms behind his back. This was the 28th day since she had joined Professor Nepson's research team, one of the greatest masters in genetics of this century and on the entire planet. His vast knowledge, brilliant ideas, and passionate attitude toward academic pursuit were everything worth learning for her. A smile spread across her face as she continued writing in her diary. Her eyes were full of admiration because being able to follow Professor Nepson was the luckiest thing that had happened to her in life. She thanked her university mentor, Mrs. Selina, because if it weren't for her enthusiastic recommendation, she wouldn't be here. With a cheerful expression, she continued jotting everything down in her diary. Lu Sheng transformed into a spirit, appeared behind her, placed his hand under his chin, and with a curious gaze began to read attentively. After reading her long diary, he more or less understood the background of this ship. This ship was a team tasked with collecting and researching genes from exotic beasts around the Indian Ocean. This also explained why there were strong warriors on board. Hunting exotic beasts to obtain genetic samples required powerful fighters. The expression of our boy changed, and his eyes widened in surprise as something caught his attention. The girl did not notice Lu Sheng's presence and continued writing distractively in her diary. The leader of this team seemed to be the Professor Nepson mentioned in the diary, so he estimated that guy must have quite a high status within the organization, like a golden figure. He began to imagine an eye surrounded by beasts. It was worth noting that Professor Nepson seemed to have a different perspective from the mainstream on the origin of mutated beasts and martial arts. He considered that both originated in the mythological concepts of demons and gods, and he had always tried to prove it, often hearing that science ends in mythology. The girl placed the pen on the table, closed her eyes, and with a smile stretched her arms. This was all she had to write in the journal for today. Just before she could move, Lu Sheng moved like lightning and appeared in front of her. With a piercing gaze, he demanded to know who Professor Nelson was. The woman's eyes filled with fear and confusion. She couldn't help but panic, asking who he was. Upon seeing that this method was not going to work, Lu Sheng activated mental control and began to imbue waves into her mind. The ability took effect, and in a matter of seconds, the girl calmed down, and with a serene gaze, she began to observe our boy. She took out a photograph of Professor Nepson. He was an old man who wore glasses. Lu Sheng started observing the photo carefully, thanked her, and then disappeared. The girl remained paralyzed, holding the photo for several seconds. Once the mental control stopped taking effect, she returned to normal and with a confused gaze questioned whether she had fallen asleep. Her attention was fixed on the photo of Professor Nepson. She began to imagine the professor winking at her. She couldn't help but blush like a tomato and be in shock. She didn't know why she was staring intently at the photo of Professor Nepson. Today was Valentine's Day, and she thought that maybe she'd made some fantasy about him. Somewhere on the ship, there was a research laboratory. Inside was Professor Nepson. He had his head resting on his arms and was sleeping like a log. There were several folders on the table. He was dreaming, thinking that Berlin's mythologies were very different from those of other countries, believing that perhaps they could bring new ideas. Lu Sheng entered the laboratory and began to gaze silently at Professor Nepson. Without making any noise, he picked up one of the folders. His eyes widened in surprise. It was a compilation of data on ancient myths from Dragonland, ancient myths from Lionland, and mythological origins from Eagle Land. He was confused to see that they had moved so many resources just for these legends of dubious authenticity. Professor Nepson kept sleeping like a log. Lu Sheng couldn't help but smile, realizing that this organization was very rich. He thought that maybe he could take advantage of this to get some benefit from them. Lu Sheng transformed into energy and disappeared without a trace. He left the ship and returned outside. While the energy was entering his body, his attention focused on the beautiful landscape. His eyes filled with surprise as something caught his attention. He activated his power, making golden energy appear around him. He started flying through the sky at great speed. He decided to lend himself for a purpose. Not far from the area, there was another ship. On the deck were two men, one of whom had both hands resting on the railing and mentioned that it would be a week before they returned. The old man who was looking through binoculars replied that it would be less time. He had noticed that some of the team leaders no longer wanted to stay. He put down the binoculars, and with a sincere expression explained that following a scientific research team is just an ordinary worker was exhausting. But everything depended on what Professor Nepson said. Although he seemed weak and fragile, his position in the organization was no less than that of those with higher royal emblems. Even those with common royal emblems did not dare contradict him. The other man turned towards him and couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised. The old man's watch began to ring. With a curious gaze, he started looking at the watch without knowing what was happening. Someone revealed to the captain that suddenly a powerful underwater current had emerged beneath them, diverting the ship, asking them to look ahead. In front of them was an iceberg. The captain was in shock, giving the order to turn the helm as soon as possible. The other man put his hands on his head and couldn't help but panic. Just a moment ago, the iceberg wasn't in the area and had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. They couldn't control the ship in time and turned the helm, causing it to crash forcefully against the iceberg. The ship stopped in place, and inside the iceberg was someone. It was none other than Lu Sheng. He began to gaze at the ground and a smile spread across his face. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video. The scene shifted to the space where Lu Sheng's body had been sucked in by the portal. The planets were beautiful, and everything seemed calm until two energies began clashing with each other. One was golden and the other purple and evil, each clash more powerful than the last, even capable of making the planets tremble. Within the energy were two powerful warriors, one in human form and another in beast form. Both moved swiftly and collided their fists against each other, creating a powerful flash capable of blinding anyone. The body of the human warrior was surrounded by golden martial fire. He was furious, clenching his fist tightly. He began concentrating his power into his fist and with an expression full of rage commanded the evil force to die. The demon's eyes were shining with malice and his body seemed to be made of energy that was not from this world. He simply stepped back and began to show a confident smile, ready to receive the attack. The human warrior activated his power, making a circle appear behind his back. He gathered all his power in his hands, then brought them together to fire a powerful burst of energy toward the demon. The demon who had been smiling before had no time to react, and the burst of energy hit him squarely on the body. The attack was so powerful that his body began to burn, causing him to open his mouth and start screaming in agony. The burst of energy pushed what was left of the demon's body, and not long after, it reached one of the planets and struck the ground with force, shattering the area into pieces. He began to laugh, revealing that he was immortal and would never be destroyed. He could be reborn infinitely on this earth until the destruction of this world, vowing that he would return. In this world, it was nighttime and the sky was beautiful. Back at the battle scene, the ground was filled with remnants of the demon. He had not died yet, and his eyes were still active. He started staring intently at the human warrior and couldn't help but feel furious. The powerful human warrior whose body was surrounded by golden martial energy descended onto the planet, and his attention focused on the remains of the demon as moonlight illuminated the area. He couldn't help but feel relieved to see that finally, the seal had succeeded. But then, something unexpected happened, and something began to approach the human warrior at great speed from behind. Upon feeling this, his eyes started to shine with seriousness, and he turned his head back to see what was happening. One of the martial flames that was on his body slowly began to fade away, and then the human warrior, who was Lu Shang, lost consciousness and his eyes closed. His body began to fall toward the ground, and little by little the golden energy that was on his body started peeling off in pieces like the shell of a boiled egg. Our boy's body shot toward the ground and struck hard against the ice, creating a large curtain of smoke. Once the smoke screen disappeared, Lu Shang could be seen inside the ice with his eyes closed. It seemed that he was still alive and had only lost back on Earth. Professor Nepson, who was sleeping like a log with his head resting on top of the table, suddenly woke up, throwing all the sheets from the folders into the air. His eyes were full of surprise and his mind filled with confusion. He began to sweat like crazy, put his hand on top of his head, and his eyes widened with curiosity. He let out a sigh without knowing if what he had just seen had been a dream. For him, the dream had been wonderful, as if it were a myth. The young man he had seen was strong and dazzling like the sun. He felt intrigued to know who he was. He opened his diary, grabbed a pen, and decided to write down the dream immediately so he would never forget it. He believed it was a divine revelation that God had secretly given to him. Just as he was about to write the dream in his diary, something happened. The ship tilted to one side, moving his table and causing all the books to fall to the floor. His eyes widened in confusion. Not knowing what was once the ship stabilized, he started looking around and quickly realized that due to a great impact, the ship had stopped. His mind filled with curiosity, he got up from the chair and opened the door. Several crew members of the ship were running like madmen. With a surprised gaze, Nepson asked what was happening. One of the men, with a serious expression, revealed that the ship had collided with an iceberg. Professor Nepson adjusted his glasses. He was in shock and could not believe that such an advanced ship had collided with an iceberg. The ship's crew went out to the deck. In front of them was a large iceberg. Two men began to release the anchor. Professor Nepson also went out to the deck, approached the captain, and with a gaze full of fear asked what had happened and how they had collided with an iceberg, questioning every nook and how they were going to continue the journey. The captain remained calm, extended his hand toward his men, and with a tranquil gaze revealed that the ship had been dragged by an underwater current, which caused it to veer off course. But luckily, with the help of his team, the ship had only grazed the iceberg slightly. His eyes were shining with sincerity. With a smile, he asked the professor not to worry since the damage was not serious and they could continue sailing. Many questions came to the professor's mind. He began to observe the captain, asking why they had stopped the ship now. With a serious expression, the captain turned toward the iceberg, revealing that this iceberg was a bit strange since when they had grazed it a moment ago. He had seen something. Professor Nepson's eyes widened in surprise, awakening his curiosity. He knew that the captain hadn't stopped the ship for having seen just an ordinary penguin. There must be something strange. The captain asked Professor Nepson to look at it himself with his own eyes. Nepson turned toward the iceberg, and with a curious gaze, he began adjusting his glasses. In front of them was a large iceberg, and inside it seemed to be a human body. Nepson's eyes widened in surprise upon seeing this. He couldn't help but be in shock when realizing there was a person. He placed his hands on the ship's railing to see the iceberg more closely. He was speechless and swore that there was a person inside the iceberg. The eyes of the captain of the ship, who was behind, filled with fear and surprise, leaving him in shock. He could not move due to fear. The professor began to imagine the powerful human warrior Lu Xing that he had seen in his dreams. His jaw dropped when he realized that the person inside the iceberg was the human warrior. He was identical to the one from his dreams, realizing that gods truly existed in this world. He turned towards the crew members of the ship, began pointing at the iceberg with his finger, and with a serene expression gave them the order to cut out the block of ice and take it to his laboratory immediately. The men were in shock, not knowing if this guy had lost his composure. In some room on the ship, someone was holding a glass of red wine. Due to the impact of the ship against the iceberg, the wine moved slightly inside the glass. The waiter, a man with purple hair, placed his hand over his chest and bowed his head in front of the man as a sign of respect, explaining that it had only been a small accident when brushing against the iceberg with the hull of the ship, which was nothing serious. But he revealed that inside the iceberg they had found the body of a Western man, adding that the body seemed very realistic. The man with black hair closed his eyes and prepared to take a sip of with a calm expression. He mentioned that it was just a body of some Western barbarian, asking what was so special about it. The waiter raised his head and casually put his arm behind his back, mentioning that the body had nothing special about it. He had examined it and discovered that it was a very normal body, probably of a martial artist who had come to the Arctic Circle seeking to push their limits with some extreme training method but had ultimately frozen to death inside the iceberg. The man's eyes filled with boredom and he looked away. The waiter seemed somewhat tired and had dark circles under his eyes with a suspicious expression. He mentioned that although it was strange, Professor Nepson seemed incredibly interested in the corpse, insisting that it was the body of an ancient god, talking about revelations and things like that. He had gone so far as to end the exploration immediately and return tonight. The man began pouring more wine into his glass and replied that Nepson had always been a bit odd, saying exotic beasts and warriors were products of myths. He decided to let him do whatever he wanted. He crossed his legs, grabbed the glass of wine, closed his eyes and started laughing, as researchers like him always had some oddity. And besides, coming back early wasn't so bad since life on this ship was unbearably boring. The waiter put his hand over his mouth, closed his eyes and also started laughing. The ship's crew cut out the piece of ice where our boy's body was frozen, then stored it inside a container and took it to Nepson's laboratory, which was located on the lowest level of the ship. Nepson arrived at his laboratory and upon seeing Lu Sheng's body, he couldn't help but go into shock because he was completely identical to the warrior he had seen in his dreams. Our boy had his eyes closed to pretend. Nepson approached the container and began to observe carefully. His eyes widened with happiness as every detail was identical. There wasn't a single mistake. He couldn't help but smile thinking that this was the god of his dreams. He put his hand inside the pocket of his lab coat, took out his journal, and decided to record the scenes from his dream, but then thought it would be better to draw them. Nepson pulled out a pen with an excited smile and started drawing and jotting down everything he had dreamed. According to him, this was the true origin of exotic beasts and the path of the martial artist. He was sure that once he published this, he would become the greatest scientist of this century. While Nepson was distracted thinking about the awards he would receive for making this discovery, little by little, Lu Sheng began to open his eyes and a powerful purple energy started to emerge from one of his eyes. He used his ability called dimensional space and thanks to it, he could see the interior of the entire ship as if it were a model. While Nepson was distracted writing in his journal, Lu Sheng began to scan the entire laboratory. His eyes widened in surprise because he discovered something fascinating. Somewhere in there was a cabinet full of containers with blue liquid. Inside, there were at least 100 bottles of exotic marrow liquid ranging from level 3 to 8, representing a fortune. Lu Sheng's gaze fixed on Professor Nepson. Just as our boy had imagined, those working in scientific research always had abundant resources and funds at their disposal. Nepson had always been obsessed with the connection between myths and exotic beasts along with the path of the martial artist. He had always tried to prove it. He was someone superstitious and stubborn. At this moment, with just a bit of hypnosis and induction, he had managed to make this guy easily fall into the lies he had woven. When Lu Sheng had controlled Lai Dai's mind, her eyes had started to shine. Although Nepson held a high position in the research circle, at the end of the day, he was nothing more than an ordinary person with elevated status. Our boy never imagined that the improvised method he had used to deal with Lai Dai in the past would be so useful here. Nepson's eyes were full of joy. With an excited smile, he continued writing everything down in his journal. What followed now was simply to constantly reinforce suggestions between dream and reality. deep into hypnosis and brainwashing, and thus Neptune would become the most fervent believer of this ancient god. Suddenly, Neptune stopped writing in his journal. With a worried gaze, he realized that this was something only he had dreamed about. He could confirm the existence of the god but did not know how to make others believe him. He dropped his journal and pen on the floor and put his hands over his head. He couldn't help but panic. Only he had received the revelations, he didn't know how to prove it, just the corpse wasn't going to be enough. He couldn't simply open up his own head and show the revelation to others. An idea came to his mind. He removed his hands from his head and with a surprised gaze, decided that the god himself would tell them. But letting the god tell everyone what had happened was somewhat of a complicated task. But for Neptune, a highly renowned scientist, it wasn't a problem. He could revive the god, and once the god descended again onto this earth, all doubts and falsehoods would be destroyed. Silence reigned for several minutes until Neptune's eyes expanded and a light of hope began to shine. He sank into his thoughts for several minutes until he struck his fist against his palm. He couldn't help but smile since there was nothing more convincing than he began to dance with joy around the vessel where Lu Sheng's body was, thinking he was a genius. He was determined to revive this god. His eyes began to shine with joy. He clenched his fist and with a confident smile, swore to make this world great again. In his mind, he was a genius. The god Lu Sheng started gazing at the ground and couldn't help but smile because everything was going according to plan. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video. It was a splendid day and the sun was shining high in the sky, and somewhere in the Eastern Military District. There was a large, luxurious building, standing out among the rest for its beauty. Inside the building, there was a training room, in which stood a white-haired woman. She was surrounded by giant but shiny steel balls. She was none other than Snowy. She remained silent for several seconds, and then, little by little, she began to raise her head and her attention focused on the balls. Her eyes were full of determination. She extended her hands, began to stare intently at the balls, and used her power, causing her body to emit a powerful and intense red energy. She gave the order for the metal balls to rise. In a matter of seconds, a golden energy appeared around the metal balls. She concentrated her power, making the metal balls slowly begin to float in the air as if they were balloons. She started observing the metal balls, placed her hands in front of her face, and with a serious expression decided to test her new technique. In the blink of an eye, the balls began exploding one after another, creating small explosions. She turned her back on them and started to walk away, then she closed her eyes and, since she was somewhat exhausted from having used so much energy, she wiped her chin with her hand. I'm not going to lie, but she has a good cake. Anyway, while she was walking away, the phone in the back pocket of her pants started ringing. Her mind filled with curiosity, she took the phone out of her pocket and turned it on to check if a new message had arrived. It was a message from our boy. He revealed to Snowy that he was fine but asked her not to reply to the message or think too much about it either. Upon seeing that this message was from Lu Sheng, she put her hand over her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears and joy. She couldn't believe that Lu Sheng was okay and hadn't died. She remained paralyzed looking at the message, and a while later, Qin appeared and entered the training room. With a cheerful gaze, he began to smile and wave at her, asking if she had received the message. Snowy placed the phone on her chest, and her eyes filled with tears. Even though she was very happy to know that our boy was okay, she couldn't help but cry. Qin approached her and upon seeing this, his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. She realized that she had also received a message from Lu Sheng, reminding her that he had said our boy would have no problems and would return safe and sound. She pressed the phone against her chest, closed her eyes, and couldn't help but smile and feel relieved. Saying that she wasn't worried would be a license after all, he had disappeared off the face of the earth for a long time. Now that there was finally news about him and the heavy stone in her heart had finally fallen, she couldn't help but wonder when Lu Sheng was going to return. Her phone rang again, she turned it on and opened Qin's chat message, Lu Sheng's sister. She wrote to Snowy revealing that she had news about her brother, then sent a stuffed animal emoji. Snowy, who was very happy, replied that she had also received messages from Lu Xing, and then sent a happy cat emoji. In the Ninghai Sea, there was a high-ranking military ship sailing at full speed. On board was the Eastern Marshal, who had his hand resting on the railing and was observing the beautiful sea. While he was distracted, lost in thought, a soldier appeared behind him, gave a military salute, and caught his attention. Upon hearing his voice, the Eastern Marshal came out of his trance and with a calm expression began to observe the soldier, who revealed that there was an urgent report from headquarters. General Lu Xing had sent news saying that he was fine but would need a few more days to return. Upon hearing this, his eyes spread with joy and happiness. He turned towards the soldier and couldn't help but smile. Now that there was news of Lu Xing, he decided it was time for everyone to retreat and gave the order to the soldier to inform everyone to return to the military district. He put his hand behind his back, clenched his fist, began gazing at the sky, and a smile appeared on his face. The army had been waiting for this day for more than 200 years, and of course they didn't mind waiting a little longer. Besides, it wouldn't be long before the god of the future army finally returned. From that day on, half a month passed, and after an arduous journey, the research ship finally successfully returned from Antarctica to Lion Country. The ship was so luxurious that it even had a helipad. Not far from the area, there was a beautiful island, full of trees and mountains, called Golden Ring Island. Located on the border between the countries Lion and Eagle, it was an island without satellite location. A few hours later, the ship arrived at the port, and using some stairs, the workers started to unload Professor Nepson's luggage and belongings. Among the passengers were two men. The man wearing a cap and holding onto his backpack strap with one hand extended his hand toward his friend and with a smile mentioned that after sailing for several months, the expedition had finally ended. The other man put his hands behind his head, closed his eyes, and casually replied that the expedition had been boring. He was honest and mentioned that this type of escort mission was worse than going to fight with the Dark Star and the Black Demon Society. The man turned his head to one side, and his eyes widened with admiration. With a smile, he asked if he also thought the same way as they did. The man wearing a cap turned towards them and began observing in silence. The purple-haired man who was smoking a cigarette started descending the stairs, explaining that anguish was also part of training. The two men turned around, began watching him, and their minds filled with confusion. They explained that the level of master was high and distant, and they were still very far from reaching it. The man opened his eyes and his gaze filled with curiosity as something caught his attention. In front of them was the capsule where Lu Shang's frozen body was. Professor Nepson was in front, giving orders, asking the workers to hurry up and make sure not to damage it. Several men were helping to take the capsule off the ship. The man approached and began observing Lu Shang in silence. The attention of the three focused on Nepson, with a gaze full of disdain. The man wearing a cap said that Nepson was a fool since he treated a simple corpse like a treasure. With an angry expression, his friend mentioned that he had heard Nepson wanted to revive the corpse. For him, this was ridiculous since there was no way to bring the dead back to life. The man with purple hair, who was smoking a cigarette, simply began to think in silence. His gaze fixed on Lu Shang and his eyes widened with curiosity. He was honest in saying that his mind was full of questions. He started walking towards the capsule and with a calm expression gave the workers the order to wait a moment. One of them turned around and greeted the man respectfully, calling him Lord of the 10th Seal. Nepson went on alert, stood in front of the capsule, extended his hands and with a furious expression asked Elton what he was doing, mentioning that this corpse was his precious experimentation material. Elton kept walking towards him and then, with a serene look, used his power and asked Nepson to step aside. Causing Nepson's body to start floating, the mind of the poor professor filled with fear. The professor's body shot backward and crashed into two workers. Their eyes widened with concern as they asked if he was okay. Nepson stood up and was furious. According to him, Elton was a barbarian, thief, and vandal. Elton approached the capsule and his attention fixed on Lu Shang, explaining that he was just going to take a look. Our boy made no movement so as not to raise suspicion. Elton extended his hand toward Lu Shang and, due to his great curiosity, used his power, causing his hand to start emitting a green glow. He decided it was time to investigate this corpse a little. Lu Shang, who had his eyes closed, felt Elton's energy and couldn't help but go on alert, since if this guy touched his body, the whole plan would be ruined. The green energy appeared in Elton's hand, and little by little he began to bring it closer to the capsule where our boy's body was. At first, Lu Shang did nothing, thinking about what to do now, but then he clenched his fist and began to release orange energy. If he didn't attack immediately, something bad could happen. Just before Elton could touch Lu Shang, by chance, his phone started ringing. Elton stopped abruptly and his eyes widened in surprise. He took out his mobile phone, turned his back on Lu Shang, and began to walk away. He decided to forget about this matter since he had no time to waste arguing over a corpse. He had other more important matters to attend to. Our boy little by little began to open his eyes and his gaze fixed on Elton. He had barely been saved. If that level 8 master had come to inspect directly, Lu Shang was not sure if he would have been able to keep pretending, much less because there were several details that would not withstand a thorough examination. Nepson was hypnotized and brainwashed. That could be ignored, but not everyone was foolish. Nepson, who was somewhat happy, began approaching our boy and used his hand to call all the workers so they could continue moving the capsule. Lu Shang closed his eyes again. He felt relieved that Elton had left, as otherwise he would have had no choice but to kill everyone and forcibly escape, but luckily, at the last moment, that guy had been called away by some important matter. Nepson's eyes were shining with hatred. He decided to make sure to report Nepson to the Master of Divine Seals. He gave the order to his men to move quickly and transport the corpse to the laboratory. A few minutes later, they took Lu Shang's body to the laboratory and connected it to a special machine. Nepson, who had his arms behind his back, stood silently contemplating but then something happened, and Nepson's expression changed. His eyes widened in surprise. He was in shock and couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Little by little, the level of liquid inside the capsule began to decrease. Nepson was speechless as the mutant metallurgy liquid had been absorbed by Lu Shang's body. He was happy to see that his plan was working, believing that divine will was awakening little by little. If enough energy was provided, soon the god would fully resurrect. He approached the microphone and with an excited smile gave his men the order to immediately exchange all his research resource quotas for this month for high-level metallurgy liquid and send it to the laboratory. He also decided to request next month's resource quota in advance so he could exchange it for more metallurgy liquid. A large amount of brain fluid from mutant beasts and cellular tissue fluid was also needed. Following Nepson's order, several men brought several boxes full of containers with mutant metallurgy liquid. The man in front gave the order to his companion to hurry up since Professor Nepson had ordered a large quantity of metallurgy liquid to be delivered. Nepson injected all the metallurgy liquid into Lu Shang's capsule and now the floor was covered with empty containers. Lu Shang, who had his eyes closed, began absorbing all the liquid again. Nepson's eyes filled with excitement. He wanted the corpse to absorb as much as it could because the more it absorbed, the faster they would be able to awaken the god. Our boy did not move, but deep down he was very happy. This was indeed with the external wounds freshly healed and the 22 immortal cells of the indestructible stellar body. His entire body was in a state of extreme need, and this mutant marrow liquid had arrived just in time. A few weeks later, our boy slowly began to absorb more marrow liquid, causing bubbles to appear inside the capsule. A smile spread across his face as the 23rd immortal cell had already begun to emerge. In these 2 weeks, he had absorbed at least an amount of marrow liquid equivalent to 8 million merits. If the cultivation tank became slightly empty, Nepson would immediately refill it. Nepson stood in front of the capsule, and the room was filled with empty containers of marrow liquid. Lu Shang realized that this professor's resources were absurdly abundant. After this, he was going to obtain dozens of additional immortal cells. Huanin's base was really lined with money, and he had to take full advantage of it. He opened his eyes and began imagining himself sitting in an armchair, wearing sunglasses and smoking a cigar, and behind him were some men prostrated before him. He had abundant resources for training, automatic replenishment if something was missing, and a protected training environment as if it were a sanctuary. For him, this was the best place in the world to train. Lu Shang closed his eyes and couldn't help but smile. He had just perceived something. Huanin's base at most had a level 9 martial arts master in the initial stage. With 22 immortal cells, Lu Shang could defeat Zhao Ji as if he were a dog, and now there was nothing to fear. He decided that now it was time to begin a true training retreat. 1 year later, in the meeting room of the base on Golden Ring Island, the people with the highest rank in the associations gathered and sat at a table. A hologram of a superior was activated. There was a man wearing a black suit with his hands resting on his knee. The white-haired woman wearing glasses crossed her arms and legs, and with a serious expression mentioned that this meeting would focus mainly on 2 topics. This year's World Martial Arts Masters Tournament in news about the new energy crystal deposit. She began to observe the others and explained that it was estimated that if they sent the 20 strongest lords of the seal, they would be able to obtain a much higher quota than in previous years. And this was because the Society of Black Magic had lost half its strength last year in the country of the dragon. It was possible that they might withdraw from the competition, so their share could only increase. The man who wore glasses and had a beard began to stare at the woman and asked if the information was reliable, and whom the Society of Black Magic had faced. The woman remained silent for several seconds. With a sincere gaze, she started showing one finger and revealed that according to reports, it had been a martial arts master who had recently ascended in the country of the dragon. Upon hearing this, everyone's expression changed, their eyes widened in surprise, causing their jaws to drop in shock. They could not believe that there was a new martial arts master in the country of the dragon. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part.
In the meeting room, the man who had a scar on his face placed his hand on the table, turned to his companion, and with a surprised expression mentioned that there was no way there was really a 4th martial saint in the kingdom of the dragon. The other man turned to him and calmly began to converse. The woman interrupted and, with a serious tone, revealed that the supreme martial saint had been gravely injured and fled after being defeated by the new martial saint. There was no doubt about this. The man who wore glasses and had a beard turned to her, extended his hand and with a curious gaze asked if the new martial saint was stronger than the supreme martial saint. He asked if this time the fight for energy crystals would not have unexpected changes. The leader of them, who had his arms crossed, interrupted and while looking at the ground, called everyone's attention and said that this matter was going to be discussed later, mentioning that although Zhao Ji had been defeated, he had also used the hidden card given to him by that lord, gravely injuring the new martial saint, whose life or death was now uncertain. The attention of everyone present at the meeting focused on him. They all began observing the hologram and listening attentively without interrupting. The leader of them was a man with a scar on his face, his eyes were shining with confidence. He made it clear that the issue of competition and energy crystals would not be affected by the new martial saint. The woman picked up a tablet and while several holograms were floating around her, using her fingers, she began to navigate through it. Her eyes filled with excitement and she decided it was time to talk about the new energy crystal deposit. She made a holographic map appear and, pointing to a specific spot with her finger, said that the coordinates were north of the great ocean of the Eagle country. The leader's attention fixed on the map and his eyes widened in surprise. With a calm demeanor, he asked if it was the correct location. The woman started looking at the leader and with a confident expression replied that the probability of there being an energy crystal deposit was more than 70%. Upon hearing this, a cheerful smile began to spread across the leader's face. Everyone remained silent for several minutes, waiting for the leader's command. After thinking it through, he gave the order to the king's seal from the 1st to the 4th and to the sect seal from the 4th to the 10th to come with him for a moment. The eyes of the man wearing glasses and sporting a beard filled with curiosity. He placed his hand over his chest as a sign of respect and casually asked if he intended to go personally. The leader's attention focused on him, and with a calm demeanor, he was honest, explaining that if it truly was a new deposit of energy crystals, both the martial saints of Dark Star and the Black Magic Society would also go. He revealed that if he himself did not accompany them, they would all simply be doomed to die in vain. The man's eyes began to shine with seriousness. He nodded his head upon seeing how astute and concerned the leader was for everyone's safety. Everyone remained silent. And seeing this, the leader closed his eyes and, noticing that no one else had anything to say, decided to end the meeting. But just then, someone asked him to wait. A man stood up, raised his hand, and with a sincere voice informed the leader that he had something very important to notify him. The attention of everyone in the meeting focused on the man. They were all curious to know what the man wanted to report. The leader opened his eyes and his gaze filled with curiosity. He began to observe the man and gave him permission to speak. The man was a bald old man, who crumpled some papers in his hand, and while his eyes were shining with rage, he began to shout and with a furious expression denounce the director of the institute, Professor Nepson, for using his name to deduct and extort enormous resources from society for half a year. He revealed an overwhelming fact. The group's flow of funds was already on the verge of completely collapsing. The man crumpled the papers even more forcefully and could not help but clench his teeth tightly due to rage. He was so furious that veins appeared on his face. A man who seemed to be younger than the rest started staring intently at the leader, slammed the table hard, and in an angry tone made it clear that Nepson was a liar, since he had told him that he recently had financial difficulties and that the research would be delayed for 3 months. Another man also joined the conversation. He stood up, and while his eyes were shining with hatred, he slammed the table hard with his hand and revealed that Nepson had promised him this was an investment, swearing that in just half a year, profits could multiply by 10. The bald man clenched the papers even harder. He was very furious and to kill Nepson. All those who were in the room began to talk among themselves, realizing that Nepson's bastard was a liar. They didn't know what to do and knew they were finished since they had lent him a lot of money and resources. The leader and the woman remained silently listening. She closed her eyes and then let out a sigh. A few days ago, she had also received news that Nepson's research funds had already been advanced until next year. As if this weren't enough. In this half-year alone he had submitted for the 4th time an application to conduct experiments with energy crystals, and the amount requested in his latest application had reached 10 grams. One of the men stood up and turned his back on the others. The other man's eyes were filled with despair and hatred because he had lent all his savings to Nepson. The bald man stood up, placed both hands on the table and fixed his attention on the leader. He began shouting like a madman, calling Nepson a greedy and cunning demon, comparing him to the devil, saying that not even the devil knew as much about how to tempt people as he did. According to those who had been swindled by Nepson, he was just an ordinary person who hadn't even begun learning martial arts, and yet he could control level 7 and 8 masters at will as if it were nothing. To them, this was absurd. More absurd than the president of Lion Country having diarrhea in public. The leader, although somewhat annoyed, simply closed his eyes and decided not to get involved in this. The woman's eyes filled with suspicion. She called everyone's attention and with a calm expression mentioned that something was not right since Nepson was not a warrior. So there was no way he needed so many funds and resources, swearing that once they got to the bottom of the matter, they would make him pay for it. However, even so, this was difficult for her to understand. With a serene expression, the leader crossed his arms and with a penetrating gaze gave Warner the order to personally go look for Nepson and ensure this matter was investigated clearly. After saying this, he ended the meeting. Warner, the man who wore glasses, placed his hand over his chest, bowed his head before his leader as a sign of respect and promised to fulfill his orders. The bald man's eyes were full of despair. He raised his hand and decided to go with him, and if he didn't get his money back, he swore to skin Nepson alive. Once the meeting came to an end, Warner, with a confident expression, began to leave the room. The other men who had been scammed by Nepson were furious and started following Warner. They decided to all go together to pay Nepson a visit. At the same time, in Nepson's laboratory, the floor was littered with empty containers of spinal fluid. Despite the liquid being expensive, it was even spilled on the ground. In front of the capsule, where Liu Sheng was located, stood two people who used 20 units of level 8 anomalous metallurgy fluid and 3 units of level 9. They were Nepson and his assistant. While the girl was holding metallurgy liquid on the shoulder, Professor Nepson was connecting the containers to Liu Sheng's capsule with a smile. He mentioned that the concentration of genetic optimizer formula number 5 was still lacking, giving her the order to keep adding. At that moment, a heartbeat was heard, and upon hearing it, Nepson's eyes widened in surprise, leaving him paralyzed with shock. Quickly, he pressed his ear to the capsule and his eyes began to shine with joy. With an excited smile, he asked if she had also heard it. He paid attention and realized that the heart of God had begun to beat. The girl, visibly surprised, placed her hand over her chest and her attention fixed on the capsule, causing her jaw to drop. Her eyes widened in surprise, making her put her hand over her mouth. She used to mock in her diary about Professor Nepson's excessive obsession with ancient myths, but she never imagined that the day would actually come to witness history. When Liu Sheng's corpse was discovered, she saw it with her own eyes. Even Professor Nepson's idea of resurrecting Liu Sheng had been ridiculed by countless people. She would have never thought he would actually succeed. Now Nepson was about to revive a dead god. Nepson stuck to Liu Sheng's capsule, and his eyes widened with excitement. He was as happy as a small child seeing candy for the first time. He couldn't help but smile upon seeing that the wonderful god was awakening. Liu Sheng had given him a revelation and a dream. And now only the moment of the true god's arrival remained. His excitement was interrupted by the sound of an alarm. There was a problem in the laboratory. Nepson detached himself from the capsule and took several steps back. With a confused gaze, he couldn't help but wonder what the problem was, while he was trying to understand the situation. At that moment, the girl, visibly scared, started running towards Nepson and with a gaze full of fear revealed that something bad had happened. Their experiment had been discovered and now many people were forcing their way into the laboratory doors. At the same time, several men arrived at the entrance of the laboratory and one of them began to pound on the door. They were furious, ordering Nepson to open it, calling him a coward. He had the guts to steal their money but not to open the door. They knew Nepson was inside and were going to do everything possible to get in. Nepson's expression changed. He turned towards the door and with a serious look called them short-sighted fools, explaining that there was no greater honor than participating in the resurrection plan of the great God. He was not going to let them ruin everything, as only one step remained for success. Lucia clenched her fist, not knowing what to do. Nepson, visibly desperate, panicked, began pointing at the door and ordered Lucia to activate as soon as possible the most advanced defense system of the laboratory to prevent those bastards from entering at all costs. Lucia placed her hands over her chest and with a worried gaze tried to explain to Nepson about the defense system. But Nepson clenched his teeth and with an enraged look said there was no time to lose, urging her to hurry since once the god awakened, everyone would know that he had been right. Lucia arrived at the defense room. In front of her there was a lever and above it there was a warning sign. With her body trembling with fear, she began to walk toward the lever. This was the defense mechanism designed according to the highest standards, so that the experiment personnel would have time to escape in case of an enemy invasion. Even if it meant destroying the evidence, the protective shield could stop a martial master for 5 minutes. She closed her eyes and without hesitating for a second, began to activate the lever. The members of the organization were no longer going to be able to enter unless they sought out the Divine King, Lord Harold. She decided to stop thinking about it since anyway this served to buy some time. Once the lever was activated, a powerful light began to emerge from the door, blinding everyone. Nepson returned to the room where Lushing's body was, started observing the god's body and with an excited smile, gave Lucia the order to use all available resources, including grams of energy crystal. Following the order, Lucia brought several containers and with a gaze full of admiration, nodded her head. Nepson fell to his knees on the ground and as a faithful believer began to pray. He asked Lushing to wake up at once so that his light would soon illuminate the sky and earth. Our boy, who was inside the capsule, began to absorb the resources with his eyes closed. He was in the dream space and had his fist clenched. In front of him, there was a zombie master with a ponytail on their knees. Lushing didn't even look the zombie in the eyes. He started to use his power and focused, causing green energy to begin emerging from his fist. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, making golden energy appear. He decided it was time to try the method of the 7 mystics of the Founder's Fingers, the technique of the Grand Martial Master of the 7 mystics called Ding Qiaoyu. Lushing began to concentrate energy in his finger. He was using a Grand Master level technique called Skill of the 7 Mystics, pointing at the stars. After taking another deep breath, Lushing struck the air with his middle finger. This technique was so powerful that a burst of energy emerged from his finger, capable of destroying even the strongest opponent. Lushing opened his eyes and a joyful smile appeared on his face, as killing with a single finger felt incredible. He extended his hand and his body began to emit energy. His attention fixed on the energy and it didn't take long for him to realize that he had made a breakthrough, and the Grandmaster technique had fused with his body. While his eyes were shining, Ding Qiaoyu's spirit appeared in front of him. He began to observe it and his eyes filled with joy. She had spent her entire life perfecting this technique, stopping just one step short of perfection. In a sense, her desire was now fulfilled through Lushing, so calling the technique pointing at the stars no longer did it justice. He decided it was better to call it cutting the sky. Lushing summoned a small red flame in his hand. He started observing it and a smile appeared on his face since cutting the sky sounded good. It had style and plenty of class. In these 6 months, he had obtained too much. In the real world, he absorbed resources without limits, and in dreams, he obtained advanced techniques. He had completely defeated all the great masters of martial arts street, accumulating a total of 41 manifestations of martial Tao. In the Wheel of Destiny, he had ignited 98 flames of willpower, achieving absolute perfection and spiritual power. He clenched his fist and his eyes began to shine with confidence since this space no longer had stronger opponents. He had completed the game in its entirety. In front of him, there was an empty alley with everything destroyed. Lushing stretched his legs and stood still. His eyes filled with suspicion as he turned around. He went on alert since in the real world someone was trying to interrupt. He could no longer keep hiding it. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, please subscribe our channel and like and share the video. Welcome to our channel.